Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Standing Committee on Official Languages. We're our 35th meeting. And today, pursuant to Standing Order 108, study of the broadcasting and services in French of the Vancouver 2010 Olympic Games, we have the plaisir renouvelé to have with us the Commissioner of the Office of the Official Language, Mr. Graham Fraser. Welcome to you and your guests to the to the committee, Mr. Fraser. Ce matin, Mr. Fraser est accompagné.
This morning, Mr. Fraser is here with Joanne Tremblay, who is the Acting Assistant Commissioner, Policy and Communications Branch. As well, Ghislaine Charlebois, Assistant Commissioner, Compliance Assurance Branch. Mr. Fraser, welcome to our committee. I would ask you to give your opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members, members of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, Mr. Chairman, good morning. It is a pleasure to talk about my follow-up report on the Vancouver 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games, which was just recently released. Your committee adopted a motion on April 28, 2009, asking me to provide regular updates on respect and promotion for linguistic duality at the Vancouver Games. In July, I provided you with my update. My follow-up report is a second update, and my presence here today gives me an opportunity to share with you the most recent developments in this file. Your committee's interest in this issue has contributed significantly to the progress made in this important area.
I published a report on the significant official languages shortfalls of the Vancouver Organizing Committee for the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games, VANOC, and of Canadian heritage. I highlighted not only VANOC's goodwill and commitment, but also the many challenges that still had to be overcome in order to make the 2010 Winter Olympics an event that reflects Canada's identity and linguistic duality. I noted that several federal institutions did not realize that the Games are an important test of their capacity to serve the public in both official languages. My staff therefore launched an awareness campaign for federal institutions last winter. Now, 5 months before the Games begin, I see that significant progress has been made. VANOC has accomplished a great deal, and some federal institutions have launched innovative initiatives to provide the public with an Olympic-caliber performance that is also authentically Canadian. However, the follow-up report that I have published also highlights many important areas for improvement. If these shortcomings are not addressed soon, they could compromise the success of the Games where official languages are concerned. The deadline is looming, and it's time for an extra push. There are only 113 days until the opening ceremonies. To be fully prepared when the flame is lit, VANOC, Canadian Heritage, and the various federal institutions that will be providing services to Canadians and visitors during the Games must take decisive action in the coming weeks. Mon rapport de suivi contient.
My follow-up report contains 11 recommendations. Some are for VANOC, others for Canadian Heritage in its coordination capacity, and a number of others are for federal institutions, especially those present in Canada's major airports. Most of the recommendations are for VANOC and deal with recruiting and training volunteers, signage, translation, and the delivery of services to the public. I was pleased to learn that the federal government announced an additional $7.7 million for translation, signage at Olympic venues, permanent signage, and the medal ceremonies. Given the urgency and importance of this issue, VANOC and Canadian Heritage needed to find a solution to the problem as soon as possible. This announcement was certainly a positive one. VANOC is now fully equipped to succeed and to ensure that all clauses of Annex A of the multi-party agreement are respected. My expectation is for these additional funds to produce concrete results that will enable athletes, media representatives, and Canadians to have a positive experience of the Games. That said, the other challenges identified in my report should not be ignored.
Plans to use for outdoor signage are very encouraging. However, I'm still concerned that VANOC's municipal and provincial partners have not shown enough urgency in this respect. The Olympic Oval in Richmond is a symptom of a larger problem. The additional funds for signage should help prevent this type of situation from occurring in the future. Regarding volunteers, the follow-up report notes that the assessment of their level of bilingualism is adequate. In addition, VANOC seems to be on its way to reaching its objective of 3,500 bilingual volunteers out of the total 25,000 volunteers. However, this 14% proportion leaves very little room to maneuver in cases where personnel may need to be moved or replaced. The volunteer deployment plan should include provisions for posting bilingual volunteers wherever they are required at any time. As many of you have already noted, I also found the countdown ceremony to be very disappointing in terms of how it reflected the country's francophonie. The quality of the cultural festivities surrounding the Games should be much higher in order to reflect all Canadians and to provide a complete image of Canada's cultural richness. This is especially true for the Games' opening and closing ceremonies, which will be watched around the world. This is in sum what my report says about elements that are under the responsibility of VANOC. There have been some changes since my report was published, which I can respond to if you have questions. Pour la plupart des gens qui iront à Vancouver,
for most people who will travel to Vancouver to celebrate the event, work at the Games, or participate in the competitions, the Olympic experience will start at the airport and in other places where federal institutions will be in contact with the public. This is why my report examines in detail the measures taken by these institutions. We've also made a series of in-person observations on the availability of service in numerous locations. I am highly concerned about the results of our study. Our analyses of on-site observations show that, despite efforts made by some institutions to improve their results, there is still no instinctive reflex to actively offer services in English and in French, despite some efforts that have been made by some institutions. In general, the airports are not prepared to welcome visitors in both official languages. There is often a complete lack of French language service, and when it is present, employees still tend to make initial contact with visitors in English only. At Vancouver Airport, the gateway to the Games, security screenings, Air Canada, and even the airport authorities obtained particularly alarming results, including a score of 0 for bilingual greetings by commercial tenants at the Vancouver Airport. As host airport and official supplier for the Vancouver 2010 Games, the Vancouver International Airport will be welcoming thousands of travelers. If the observation results are any indication, a business-as-usual approach is clearly insufficient. The situation is also far from perfect at Toronto's Lester B. Pearson International Airport, which is Canada's largest airport, as well as a major hub. Consequently, a large number of visitors will be passing through Pearson while traveling to the 2010 Games.
Stress that the employees of Parks Canada and Service Canada can provide bilingual services in nearly all cases. However, these institutions need to ensure that all their employees greet visitors in both official languages to let them know that bilingual service is available. To achieve this, Parks Canada has developed a video for its employees on active offer of services in both official languages, which has been quite successful and which has been used by many other institutions since. I really want to underline the value of that video, which I found very impressive. For its part, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which administers the important Granville Island site, also seems to be able to provide bilingual services, but has the same issues with bilingual greetings. Some institutions have already reacted positively to my report since it was published. We have met the Retail Tenants Association of the Lester B. Pearson International Airport and had a productive discussion. Last week, I was invited to speak to close to 300 employees of the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority about my report and the importance of bilingualism at the Vancouver Games. I'm encouraged to see that it's already had an impact. Dans mon rapport, j'ai demandé.
In my report, I asked each of these institutions to provide me with an assessment of their official language's performance after the Games. I hope that these will be stories of success and innovation, not embarrassing failures. In conclusion, I would like to clarify one last thing. The Vancouver 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games belong to all Canadians, and it is essential that they reflect Canadian values, including linguistic duality. I do not want visitors to be greeted with, there needs to be a system, a protocol, or a method in place where volunteers, VANOC personnel, security officers, or other employees can say, un instant s'il vous plaît, and refer a visitor to a bilingual colleague.
600,000 people are fluent in both our official languages, about half of whom live in British Columbia. Many federal institutions prove every day that official languages are an important part of quality service. And for every challenge, there is a solution. These solutions may be those developed by the various players themselves or put forward in my report. I'm pleased to see the progress made so far, but worried that certain key elements are still not in place. Everyone involved must act now to give it the necessary push. The Games are an international event and a unique opportunity to showcase linguistic duality as a fundamental Canadian value. The international francophonie's expectations for Canada are high. Comme le souligne Monsieur Jean-Pierre Raffarin.
As pointed out by Mr. Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former French Prime Minister, and the great witness of the francophonie at the Beijing Games, since Canada is an officially bilingual country, no one would understand if French were to take a back seat during the Games. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, good morning. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Madame Tremblay, Ms. Charlebois. Isn't Sorry I Don't Speak French the title of an excellent book? Unfortunately, we still hear that a lot these days. It's still quite used. I didn't use that phrase to promote any book. I was just plugging your book. It's a very good book. Now, is the advisory committee active? Is it operational? Is it working well? Are you in contact with them? Yes. Today, in fact, there is a meeting of the advisory committee in Vancouver. Mr. Raffarin was here in Ottawa yesterday. We tried to meet up, but unfortunately there was scheduling problems. But he did meet with people here in Ottawa, and he will be in Vancouver today for the advisory committee meeting. In light of their work, I can tell you that the Prime Minister named Jacques Gauthier as his personal representative in order to promote the official languages file, and he's part of the advisory committee. So things were slow to get starting, but they're working well now, yes. You spoke about the problems with translation, interpretation, signage, greeting the public. According to you, what are the biggest problems and today? Well, I had a conversation with people from VANOC yesterday, and they told me that they're having discussions on all fronts. So, yes, there are discussions with the Translation Bureau. They are establishing a secure site here in Ottawa in order to ensure distance translation. And today they're launching discussions with mayors of the municipalities, including Vancouver and Whistler, as well as the directors general of those municipalities. As well, there are discussions with engineers with regard to signage in particular, and the Richmond Oval. So discussions are underway. I can't tell you which file is further ahead than another. So what is your next step in terms of follow-up? We've asked that some institutions that are named in the report provide us with a report at the end of November. And we will be making observations during the games. We've also asked institutions themselves to report after the games. We don't plan to do another follow-up report between now and the games, but I've committed to making quarterly reports. If you think I should be making another follow-up report before the games, I could still once again testify before you and bring forward issues. I would appreciate that, given that there are a number of issues outstanding, and it's always quite informative when you come to speak to us. With regard to the airports and the Vancouver airport, which group or individuals are responsible there, or we could call to testify? Well, there's the Vancouver Airport Authority. As you know, the structure at airports, those airport authorities don't have a direct link to the federal government, as was the case in the past. But each and every time an airport has over 1 million travelers, they have linguistic responsibilities. And that was the case in Vancouver forever. But, you know there's a problem at the airport, and yes, it's the CEO of the airport authority who's responsible. I know my time is up, but you said that we have to act quickly if we want to avoid failure. And when do you think we should act? I said that there's 113 days left before the games. In order to improve the system, one of the things I've learned in the past 3 years is changes take time. And so we're trying to do things as quickly as possible in order to be ready for the games. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. We'll now move on with Mr. Nadeau. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tremblay, welcome. Ms. Charlebois, Mr. Fraser, welcome. I went to Vancouver from the 9th to the 14th of October last. And the main purpose of my trip was to see what the level of preparedness was for Quebecers and Canadians heading to the Olympics and wanting to be served in French. I wanted to make sure that services were adequate, and it got off to a very bad start. I talked to you about this at the last meeting. I won't repeat everything. You received my complaint. When I was at the Ottawa airport, in fact, that's where things started. And just let me tell you that everything went well in Vancouver in terms of airports. But when I wanted to be served in French, I'll tell you what the name of the agency was. So it was the Canadian Transportation Agency, the CATSA. I was dealt with politely, a person served me in French, and everything went well. Now, I didn't really undertake any sort of undercover investigation or anything. I didn't put on any sort of disguise, but the day went well. But you'll be receiving another complaint with respect to Air Canada. I'd like to know whether that corridor, Ottawa-Vancouver, is a bilingual corridor or not, because I couldn't get any services in French. Air Canada, I think it was flight number 180. In any case, you'll get it through mail. I also met the Federation of Francophones in British Columbia. They are a partner in this project. And I also read your report, Raising the Game. And we're now at 113 days before the opening ceremonies. And as I said from the outset, there's a whole orchestra involved here. And unfortunately, though, if one person's playing a wrong note, then everything can go badly. So there are still some things that remain to be done. And I have several points I want to raise. So let me go one point at a time, and we'll see what happens. Richmond first. I was told that the mayor of Richmond wanted to go before the council to talk about French services at the Games. I think that's troubling. Now, I'm talking about Canadian pride here. I'm sorry if I made a face when I said Canadian pride, but here we are today still trying to convince Canadians that French is important and that the French fact is important throughout Canada. So we've been given the Winter Olympics, and we're still discussing this. So I find it troubling that VANOC still has to convince people of the importance of this, and there are many other questions. Will Vancouver Tourism and BC Tourism be able to be offering French in their kiosks? So will there be an active service, offer of services in their kiosks? Because that's where people will be going to get their information. It's not the only place, but it's one of the places. Now, the Cultural Olympics. This is also an issue. There's a very, very short list of Francophones, and we want to make sure that Franco-Canadians are on there and that Acadians are there and that they also are just as important as Quebecers and that they have their place on the list. But this is very troubling. Again, here we are at the last minute, and this hasn't been dealt with. Signage as well, and that harks back to Richmond. I read about this in your report, that there was a problem. Will there be signage in French everywhere? Yes. Official languages will always be there. So will this signage be permanent? Could you enlighten us on these issues? Is there anything you know that we don't know at this point? So I'll give you the floor on these issues. Well, first, thank you for having told us about your own experience. And thank you for having followed this so closely. These types of questions and meetings are very important to underscore how important these issues are. It's not my impression that I'm just a lone voice in the desert, that I'm a part of a broader team, a larger team. And so thank you for bringing these points to my attention. Now let's look at these point by point. I'm sorry, Mr. Fraser. Mr. Nadeau used up pretty much all his time, so you'll have to probably wait until the next question to respond. We'll move on with Mr. Godin. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Commissioner. And good morning to your colleagues, Ms. Tremblay and Ms. Charlebois. Earlier, you said that $7.7 million extra dollars had been allocated for translation. This was a recent announcement. It was made in the papers. Do you feel that that money is available and that it's actually giving the means to Vancouver to do this? Or has it just been an announcement? So there is a difference between an announcement and the money actually being allocated. Sometimes it can take months, and sometimes it takes a while for a check with the logo of a party on it and a signature at the bottom to turn into money. So, do you see anything concrete being done with that $7+ million? Well, just to clarify what this money involves, that's for 5.3 is for translation, and from what I understand, a check wasn't just sent out to be spent in any old way. An arrangement has been reached with the Translation Bureau, and they are the ones who will be responsible for that translation. And I can tell you that the Translation Bureau has an international excellent reputation. We had some concerns that VANOC wanted to hire students to do the work and not necessarily use professionals. So I was quite pleased to learn that it would be done this way. And you have actually put many questions yourselves on this. And so this is happening now with the Translation Bureau. So it is. So is there an agreement? Is there a signed agreement? This is a done deal? Well, I can't tell you exactly. The Translation Bureau is in the process of organizing the work, organizing how they'll be able to do this work remotely. So there have been discussions, and there were discussions that led to these numbers. There were some very in-depth conversations that took place in order to be able to establish the time and the work involved in translating these documents, because there are many, many documents involved. For example, there have to be the biographies of all the athletes have to be translated, for example. And we won't have those before December 31st because these teams in these countries are being chosen. They're chosen not necessarily at the last minute, but they'll be chosen at the end of the year. So in terms of documents, there are several that have to be translated. So I was very pleased to learn that this process now is being defined. Now, there's also money for signage, permanent signage, that, as Mr. Nadeau pointed out, will be there permanently. Engineers are currently preparing the designs for the Richmond Oval and for other signs. There are also currently talks ongoing with the Mayor of Richmond and the Mayor of Vancouver for signage on municipal territory. Now, this is a more delicate area, and that's why in my report I underscored the importance of cooperation and collaboration. There have been municipal elections. During the municipal elections, there's no obligation, but you just need to work in the Olympic spirit. There has to be this spirit of collaboration. So these discussions are taking place actually today. And the outcome of those discussions will be available. So these are discussions that actually should have taken place before the games were even given to Vancouver. If people hadn't been willing to follow those rules, then perhaps they shouldn't have been, the games shouldn't have been located there. Now, Vancouver Airport, without the Olympics, is this an airport that gets more than 1 million people per year? Yes. Well, then there has been a breach of the law then, regardless of whether there are Olympics or not. Yes, this is an ongoing problem. Thank you, Mr. Godin. We'll be able to come back to you, but we now have to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome. As you had mentioned earlier, the federal government announced $7.7 million in additional funding, and that would be for such things as translation and interpretation for the services of the 2010 Games. And with realizing that VANOC would not be able to fulfill all the requirements without this, this amount was intensely negotiated with VANOC, like it wasn't just a spontaneous decision based on the publication of your report. So my question is, are you happy with the amount announced?
I was very pleased by the announcement, and we are continuing to follow as closely as possible the steps by that are following to make sure that this is not just an announcement, but that there is follow through and that the money is spent in the areas that they've been designated. This whole exercise in which you've all been involved in in many ways as much as we have is one to make sure that we get it right, that the games are a success in terms of Canada's face as with which the way in which we greet the world. So rather than simply arriving afterwards with a clipboard saying the mistakes that have been made, this whole exercise, which started 2 years ago, really, has all been designed to ensure to focus on the results of what happens in February and March. I was pleased by the announcement and am following very closely what is actually done.
Mm-hmm. We too, of course, all want to see that it is a big success for part of Canada. And do you think the government took a wise decision by dealing directly with the Translation Bureau?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And the last one, are you satisfied that the French will have equal dimension and status for the signage?
Again, one of the challenges in terms of signage is that the Olympic experience doesn't just happen on the Olympic site. It happens when the traveler goes through airports, gets on planes, takes taxis, deals with provincial organizations, goes past municipal areas, and finally, at the end of the day, arrives on the Olympic site itself, but having gone through a whole series of visual and oral experiences. So I was pleased at the changes that VANOC made to its signage. The federal government itself has been pretty consistent on signs. There is a challenge in terms of ensuring that other levels of government that don't have language obligations respond to the spirit of the Games and the spirit of hosting an international event. So, and it's going slightly broader than just simply the question of physical signs. You've got the issue of the internet, where with one click of a finger, you move from a federal site to a provincial site to a municipal site without necessarily being aware that you've shifted jurisdiction with one click.
Yes.
And so it's a challenge extending the spirit of the Act beyond the jurisdictions where the Act formally applies.
Yes, I realize that too. And I also know that the government was upset as well when they saw that the signage was not going to be the same as the English. And how's my time?
You're almost done, about 20 seconds.
I just had one more question. I was wondering, in your opinion, should the Privy Council office intervene to ensure that services are available in both French and English, and if so, if yes, why?
In terms of the Games, it's I think that the Privy Council has a role of supervising activities of government as a whole. In the past, I have commented on, reflected on some of the problems that the specific coordinating responsibility for official languages was transferred from official languages to Canadian Heritage. But I think that's a much more complex issue than just dealing with the Olympics. But if you want, we can refer you to some of the studies that we've done on that governance issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. O'Neill-Gordon. Maintenant, on va continuer avec Monsieur Trudeau.
Now move on to Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Trudeau, welcome to the committee. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm quite pleased to be here today and to meet you, Mr. Fraser. I have a first question for you. In the news, we've read that there's less money available because of the economic crisis and that this will have effect on the Games. Will this have an effect on the presence of French in the Olympics because of this budget? Well, I think it did have an impact on planning and priorities from the very outset. 3 years ago, perhaps 2 years ago, there was a lot of enthusiasm on the part of the organizers, and that has become a little, somewhat dampened a little bit because there have been economic problems. Yes, but this is more at the level of priorities. For example, when there was the housing crisis, well, that was of great concern to the organizers for perfectly understandable reasons. So I think that there were shortcomings in the organization, and we identified these in our report. And that may explain the need that was then met by the government's announcement.
From you a lot is how important it is to present a bilingual country to the world. The identity of Canada is wrapped up in its 2 official languages, and it's something we absolutely need to showcase properly for the greatness of this country and its vision and its perception in the world. When you're out there in Vancouver, I mean, I spent 5 years as a French teacher in Vancouver, so I'm aware of the difficulties with the French language in Vancouver. Is it perceived as a hassle by people that they have to provide French, that they have to deliver in French? Have we managed to communicate the larger vision and the opportunity it represents, or are people just seeing it as a responsibility, something they have to go through, even though they sort of roll their eyes about it?
I've actually been pleasantly surprised on that front. I think that from the outset, VANOC took the view that they would surpass any technical obligations. They saw this as something that they would be very proud of. But I don't think that they realized just what an organizational challenge it would be. And then when the financial crisis hit and there were other problems, they began to realize that some of their budgeting predictions had not been sufficient. If you look at the degree to which parents in British Columbia are desirous of having their children in French immersion, if you see the degree to which the Chinese community is seeking French language training and availability, my sense is that in British Columbia, there's, of course, a realization that you can live a very successful life in British Columbia without learning French, but also a realization that if you want to play on the national stage, that it's a critical asset. And so I think that there is that sense that British Columbians who want to play beyond the provincial boundaries at a national level realize that how important bilingualism is. And I think there's also...
And the Olympics are therefore an opportunity
That's
towards
right.
that.
That's right.
My concern around, for example, the Richmond Oval, where there's been some negative press, how are we on that file? I mean, I'm not up on all the details of it, obviously, but has there been a little openness towards...
The discussions are ongoing. There are discussions going on this week with the engineers. That I think at the end of the day that there will be the signage issue will be addressed. Again, I think there was a slowness to recognize that if you're going to be hosting an Olympic building in which the two official languages of the Games and of Canada are English and French, there is not that automatic sense that this is not just a local arena that we're talking about here. This is an Olympic and national institution that's being created.
Why wasn't that awareness encouraged?
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. We'll move on with Ms. Gay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mr. Fraser, Madame Tremblay, and Ms. Charlebois. I have a lot of questions, so I'd ask you to, at 113 days before the Games, I would like to give me brief answers. 16 weeks. I said 16 weeks, not 5. 16 weeks before the Games. I was a bit shocked by that. But you must realize that in January, we do not sit here between end of December until end of January. So we have to move quickly on this file, and we're already at the end of October. We've heard from witnesses on Tuesday, and we spoke a lot about services at the airports. You know, when people come into a country, the first contact they have is at airports, whether at Toronto, Vancouver, and in Montreal. But in Montreal, I'm not worried because the services are bilingual. And if you're badly received, I can tell you that will taint your whole stay. And those witnesses weren't able to tell us how many people were bilingual at the border services, whether at Pearson or at Vancouver. So that's concerning. We did not have any numbers. I don't know if you studied that issue or if you could give us some precise figures. And we need 24-hour service. Well, we don't have accurate figures, but I can tell you that CATSA is one of the institutions that we will single out to give us a follow-up report. So we will be addressing that institution. Ghislain, would you like to talk about the situation in greater detail? Briefly, please. I have other questions. Well, specifically with regard to this CBSA, it will be giving us a follow-up report. We are continuing our discussions with them. But the report they give us is very worrisome. Well, we also share those concerns. Could you perhaps put some pressure on them? Do you have the authority to do so, to ensure bilingual services? Well, we constantly remind them of their obligations to provide those services. Very well. And I understand that you don't have any authority to get them to act. Mr. Fraser, earlier my colleague asked you concerning the $7.7 million that have been recently announced, and we don't know exactly how that $7.7 million has been allocated. Can you give us a breakdown on that amount? I can't give you the exact contracts, but I can tell you that for translation, there's been $5.3 million allocated. For signage, $1.5 million. And for the medal ceremonies, $900,000. In your latest report, you indicated that the VANOC thought of only translating part of athletes' biographies into French. That's very worrisome. You also indicated that information on the media website would only be available in English. I don't understand. Was that addressed? Was that corrected? Will improvements be made? And we have not received any information as to whether those changes would be made. Well, we are continuing to have discussions on the terms and conditions in order to address that issue. I was told yesterday, actually, that with the service delivery in some areas that will be dealing with the public and the media, there would be between 30 and 55% of volunteers that would be bilingual. So there's this idea of placing the bilingual volunteers in strategic locations. And that was in response to one of our concerns. It's all very well to have 12,000 bilingual volunteers, but if the right person isn't at the right place, that doesn't settle anything. So, indeed, we are following up implementation of our recommendations in as great a detail as possible. Because you need bilingual people at the customs. It's a question of security as well. If they only can say a few sentences in French, that might lead to security concerns, because people might not understand what's going on. Thank you. If you would briefly comment. Well, you have to distinguish between the border services and the security services. The border services are federal employees, government employees, whereas CATSA employees are third parties. Actually, they're private companies that hire staff. So that leads to additional challenges with regard to linguistic obligations. But as I indicated in my opening remarks, the organization organized a special day training session on the Olympics. And I spoke to them about the importance of active offer and the importance of having a system to bring in people with the experience in order to avoid the experience that Mr. Nadeau, or to reconfirm the experience that Mr. Nadeau had at the Vancouver airport. Thank you, Ms. Gay, and thank you, Commissioner, for the distinction between the border services and the security services at airports. Mr. Godin. Oh, I apologize, Mr. Godin. I got ahead of myself. Ms. Boucher. Apologize, Mr. Godin, for taking your place, although I'm happy to do so. Good morning, Mr. Fraser. I'm always interested to know that French is important everywhere across Canada. A lot has been said in the past months about the Broadcasting Consortium for coverage of the Olympic Games in order to ensure French coverage. Do you support the CRTC in the request made to the Broadcasting Consortium in order to broadcast at least the opening and closing ceremonies for all Canadians? In my view, the important thing is that all Canadians have access to the games on television. I know that the consortium has done a lot of work, and I also greatly appreciated the interest that has been shown by the CRTC in that regard. I myself appeared before the CRTC, and I was quite impressed by the CRTC's chairs and his determination to put pressure on the consortium and CBC Radio Canada. At the same time, I do recognize that there are significant challenges for Radio Canada and ongoing discussions. But the important thing is, as I said, that all Canadians have access to the games on television. I don't want to get into the details of those negotiations, and I'm not sure whether they're ongoing or if it's at an impasse. But according to what you've heard at the committee, there was a sizable gap between the two parties, according to the chair. I have another question. A lot has been said about bilingualism. We know that in Quebec there are Anglophone communities. Do you think they will be facing similar issues as the Francophone communities outside of Quebec with regard to broadcasting? My understanding is that most Anglophone communities in Quebec can access CTV. There might be some exceptions in certain remote areas. So there might be some issues there, but I don't have specific information to that aspect. Another question. As for the initiatives taken by VANOC with regard to the Francophone media, have they taken enough efforts with regard to the French media? Well, the challenge is that we're talking about daily newspapers, and aside from the Ottawa region and in the Acadian region, they're usually not daily papers. Now, in Quebec, there are fewer problems with regard to press coverage because there is an agreement that was negotiated over a few months with Anglophone networks, as well as Jessica newspapers, including Le Droit newspaper here in the region. So I was pleased to see that agreement signed, but communities that depend on weeklies don't receive the same amount of information as those that are served by daily papers. So communities in remote or rural regions might have less access to the games. And might not be as aware of what will be going on because they live in those remote areas. It is always a challenge for remote regions. Thank you, Ms. Boucher. We'll complete our fourth round with Mr. Godin. The second round, I apologize, second round. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to get back to the Vancouver Airport situation. So the Vancouver Airport is designated bilingual. Once again, it's sad to see that 113 days before the games, we're still asking questions with regard to services offered there. What else can we do to ensure that the Official Languages Act is respected? You know my opinion in that regard. It's all very nice to be nice and sweet with people, but if the police asks me to drive 100 kilometers an hour, I mean, I'll drive 100 kilometers an hour. I mean, it's the same with the Official Languages Act, and yet the Vancouver Airport Authority has violated the Act every day. And this has been going on for a long time under the Liberal government, under the Mulroney Conservatives. So this problem has been going on for 40 years. There has been a lack of respect for the Act. A lack of respect for the Act. This institution is designated bilingual, but the Act has been implemented now for 40 years. What would you suggest instead of just saying, I hope they act in good faith? And it's the same thing in Toronto and in Ottawa. It's unfortunate to see that our colleague Nadeau comes to the Ottawa airport and cannot be served in French. Ottawa, the capital of our country. It's unfortunate to see that in the capital of a country that's officially bilingual, that the airport cannot provide services in both official languages. So what would you suggest other than simply saying that discussions have to be held? Well, Mr. Chair, I can tell you that the Office of the Commissioner, we've made it a priority over the next few years to focus on the traveling public, to identify not only specific institutions, but to look at the overall situation and the needs of the traveling public. The member talks about penalties and road fines. Let me give you another comparison. If I receive a fine for having driven 80 kilometers an hour in a 50 kilometer zone, well, perhaps the individual won't repeat that, but if there isn't a sign up, a stop sign on the corner, or something to indicate that it's a 50 kilometer an hour zone, other drivers will just keep on going as fast as they wish. So it's not up to individual drivers to check their speed. There have to be signs, there have to be police officers who enforce the law, or you need a radar system. Something has to be done. It's like a white-collar crime. If we don't do anything with white-collar criminals, they'll keep on committing those crimes. The Act has been in place for 40 years. I'm not hitting on you, Mr. Fraser. Whether it's you or your predecessor, the Act has been in place for 40 years. Another question with regard to security at the airports. Even if the services are provided by a third party, aren't they subject to the Act? Absolutely. But, Mr. Fraser, you said that's why it was difficult. Why is it difficult if we have an Act in place? Is it the government that's not enforcing the Act? Someone has to enforce the Act.
Well, it's precisely because of those issues that we decided to make this a priority, Mr. Chairman. That is, to take a close look at linguistic rights and services to travelers. All right, so you're saying you made this a priority, but you're not the only one who has said this is a priority. We have an official languages committee. I don't even think it should have to exist because the Act should be respected, but we have to constantly talk about this week after week after week, twice a week, and we have to call you here. We need a commissioner of official languages for an Act that has been in place for 40 years. So, are you confident that the program that you have established here is actually going to work? Because the signage issue has existed for 40 years. We've had an Act for 40 years, and it's still an issue. Well, Mr. Chairman, am I confident? Well, if I wasn't, I wouldn't be suggesting this approach. But the goal here is to change the outcome. And we used to proceed on a case-by-case basis, and it did not have enough of an impact on the institutions. Therefore, We have used other approaches to try and change institutional behavior, institutions that have very clear responsibilities, statutory responsibilities. Thank you, Mr. Fraser, and thank you, Mr. Godin. We'll start our third round now with Ms. Zarak. And the bell is only pointing out that the House is beginning to sit. There is no vote. Thank you, Mr. Fraser, and thank you to your colleagues. Mr. Fraser, thank you for your presentation. And I think the way you wrapped up was good. This isn't just a question of national pride. This is a question of the Francophonie as well. And I think that we have to keep this in mind. So the Olympic flame has been lit and the countdown has begun. You were asked earlier if you were satisfied with the $7.7 million. I'm sure that you were very pleased because in your report of the 15th of September, you had once again pointed out that there was a lack of funding. And you pointed out in your very first report, so I'm sure you're pleased and proud of this. And I'm sure that it is thanks to you that this extra funding has been allocated. But is it enough? And has it not come too late? Mr. Chairman, I hope not. But what should be pointed out is this. What's important in the process here is not how I feel, whether I'm happy or whether I'm unhappy or whether I'm confident or not confident. What is important is the outcome. I agree with you, but we can't necessarily wait for an outcome. We have to actually provide for the outcome. Well, what I have observed is that a number, an amount was settled on. It wasn't just any number, just pulled out of a hat. That number was picked, that amount was picked to meet a need. In a financially difficult context. That is, a context in which people are afraid of just money being sent anywhere and maybe being used in any fashion. So, of course, there had to be frank, open discussion and intensive discussion between the government and the organizers. And so, at this point in time, there is nothing in my mind to suggest that there have been any mistakes made in our calculations. However, today is not the important date for this type of discussion. We are going to have to follow up on this and follow it closely and see for ourselves what the outcome is. I'm sorry, I have another question. That's why I'm cutting you off. You talked about the spirit of cooperation at the municipal level. Well, we all know that budgets have been set for municipalities, so there will be no extra money available before the Olympics. So it's all very well to talk about a spirit of cooperation. However, there has to be a certain amount of incentives in order to achieve these outcomes. Do you think there will be any financial incentives for municipalities? I don't know. I can't say. Do we have any other information on funding, signage funding at the municipal level? No. So at this point in time, so we just have to cross our fingers and hope that they will do their part? I assume that this signage funding doesn't just involve the Oval, the Richmond Oval. However, I can't really give you a greater breakdown of this funding within that envelope. Okay, so just quite briefly, I also had the same experience Mr. Nadeau had. I went to Vancouver, and at the airport there wasn't a problem. However, when I was seated, I heard passengers speak to Air Canada agents, and their answer to them was, "I don't speak French," and this was in that corridor, Ottawa, Vancouver. So perhaps we should ask them to read the Commissioner's book. And we will have, actually, them as witnesses next week. We'll move on with Ms. Glover. Thank you, and welcome once again to our witnesses. I'm going to move quite quickly. I'm quite pleased with what you stated when you said that was important is the outcome. So let's talk about results now. We had a meeting on Tuesday with Canada Border Services Agency, and I was shocked by the comments of some opposition members with respect to your work and the quality of your work and of your results. Allegations were made also with respect to the government and our relationship with you and your office. So I'd like to hear some brief comments on this just to clarify the situation and respond to the comments. So I'm going to start with what was said so that you know what was said. Mr. Damour from the Liberal Party made a comment as follows. This morning, I'm probably going to deal with the only complaint that you said you have received, and then we'll be able to determine whether it is the only complaint. This is a citizen from my riding who experienced difficulties with the Rigaud Training Centre, and I'd like to talk about these issues and see how you will react. Perhaps the Commissioner did some work, but some work on this. However, the people were not the same from the beginning of the process to the end, and we'll see what happens in the future. So that was the first comment. And the second was from Mr. Godin from the NDP party. And I'm quoting in French. He said that it's not the first time that this has happened. Second, Mr. Damour said that he believes that the Official Languages Commissioner... excuse me, I'm sorry, Ms. Glover. Point of order. Point of order. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, she is out of order. We're putting questions to the Commissioner on official languages, and we're not here to hear quotes from our other colleagues. That's a waste of time. Let's stick to the topic, please. And the topic is Vancouver. So she's not supposed to be quoting from other colleagues. Ms. Gay, our colleagues have a right to make public quotes or to repeat public quotes. So your point of order is not in order. Mr. Chairman, perhaps I could respond to what we have done with respect to the complaint that we received. I'm sorry, just a moment then, Mr. Fraser. I just have to wrap up with the point of order. Thank you, Ms. Gay, and I will now give the floor back to the member. Ms. Glover. Thank you, Ms. Glover. So I'll just continue with what Mr. Damour said from the Liberal Party. He said, however, with respect to what happened in Rigaud Training and in Fredericton, that has not been assessed. And Mr. Pierre Paquet answered that the investigation on the part of the Commissioner was an exhaustive, comprehensive investigation. 10 hours of interview were spent with the investigator on issues that were raised. So he said this in response to Mr. Damour. And finally, Mr. Yvon Godin said, Mr. Chairman, I'm starting to get concerned that the official government is starting to give credit to the Official Languages Office. He is supposed to be the official languages watchdog. Now, I'm not saying that the Commissioner is not doing good work, but it seems like all these reports are just fine and dandy, and everyone's getting to the airport. But everyone's getting to the airport, and they can't get services in their own language. And he's just congratulating himself on the work that's done. But people can judge for themselves. So that's what was said. This is my question, Mr. Commissioner. That complaint was received, and I do not think those comments were justified. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell us whether or not Mr. Paquet was right or wrong. And I also want to say that I have always had the greatest of respect for your work and for you. And I've repeated it many, many times. And I have much more respect for you than what you can see from the opposition. And I will continue to say that. I've said it many times. And I think that we have your partnership with us is an excellent partnership, an essential partnership. And I would like to hear your response to these comments, the ones that I just quoted. And I'd also like to know how you think your relations with the government are going. Mr. Chairman, do I have time to respond? You have about 2 minutes. Let's take this specific case. We undertook a rather detailed investigation on what happened. And it was a rather complex process. It dealt with the issue of linguistic choice on the part of the plaintiff. After the investigation, we did not find evidence that the agency had not used the language of choice on the part of the plaintiff. Now, we can go into that in greater detail if you like. Ms. Charlebois can talk to you about it in greater detail. But what we did was suspend the investigation. We did not establish whether that complaint was founded or not. So it wasn't that we said it wasn't well-founded. It was more that we suspended it. Now, we had discussions during that investigation. We had discussions with the agency, and we realized that there had been a lack of information between the central agency and people in the regions. So we told the agency that staff in these regions have to be more familiar with these issues and have to communicate the course times and courses to the plaintiff. As a result of that investigation, the agency is now at each stage of the process communicating that there is a choice of language. The agency has also said that there is a possibility of failure if you take your training in the second language, rather. So that information has been provided, because sometimes someone can choose a second language for their training, but after the fact, they find out that perhaps they shouldn't have chosen to follow their training in their second language. So they didn't necessarily know what the implications of their choice were. So the agency has changed its approach. And that's just one example of where an intervention led to an outcome in terms of the behavior of the institution. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Ms. Glover. We'll now move on to Mr. Nadeau. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fraser, earlier on I had a series of questions for you, so I just want to remind you of the points I raised, and then perhaps you can respond to the points that I raised. In your report, you said that VANOC had about 5 or 6 translators and revisers, and they needed 65. Between 65 and 70 translators in order to ensure that signage and information, pamphlets, any written information would be provided in both languages. I'd like to know what stage we're at with respect to that point. My other point is this, and you raised it in your report. That is the issue of being provided information simultaneously in both languages. Because I think it was pointed out that it'll take sometimes 12 hours to get the French version, or 6 hours in other cases. Now, you'll agree with me that in a society in this day and age, in our country, waiting for 6 to 12 hours to get a version in the other official language is of some concern. So there's this issue of simultaneous availability of information in both languages. And translation is a new issue of concern for the Federation. They want those services to be provided in both languages. We're talking about thousands and thousands of words to translate. Could you respond, please? Well, with respect to translation, I know that the Translation Bureau is now actively involved. But with respect to numbers of translators and number of hours and resources within the Bureau, I cannot really comment at this point in time. With respect to simultaneous availability of information, how do we avoid this phenomena? That is to say that a comment made by an athlete be translated into English and then back into French. I mean, that's a rather strange situation, and we're continuing to follow that. I don't necessarily have more information on that, but that's a very important issue, and it has to be resolved. And now the issue of medical services and emergency services. Will those services be available? There might be an athlete, a Francophone athlete from Saskatchewan, Acadia, or from Switzerland or Luxembourg, for example. So from another country. And they're involved in sports. So these are high-performance sports, and injuries are a part of that, unfortunately, and even accidents. So do you have a guarantee that there will be physicians available for athletes or spectators if accidents happen? Because when there's a health issue, it's only natural that someone want to be able to express their feelings in their own language. So do we have that resource here in this country to respond to that situation? Well, I was told that more effort is being made to make sure that we have a bilingual capacity in the area of safety. Now, with respect to medical resources, I take note of your comments, and we will raise that issue at the appropriate level, because I absolutely agree with you that it's all very well to get along with institutions, to muddle your way through exchanges with various institutions in another language, but when it's an injury that we're dealing with, then it's important that you be able to speak in your first language.
Another issue regards bilingualism itself. Where do we set the bar? To say the 3,500 volunteers, the bilingual volunteers, out of the 25,000, how do we ensure that they have adequate understanding and in order to certify that they're bilingual? And that we don't find ourselves with people who can only say a few words, a few sentences. If I understand, there was an interview process in order to set the level of bilingualism required for the designated bilingual volunteers. We will be closely following up on training provided. I know of some examples of people who are not in designated bilingual positions, but who do have certain French, have some French knowledge, and so who could have a basic conversation in French, but who would not necessarily be able to provide detailed explanations. But they could direct someone who is looking for information to someone who is really bilingual. Not all meetings between the public and those volunteers require the same level of bilingualism. Yes, briefly, Commissioner? Yes, Mr. Nadeau. Have you been asked to participate in the team that has set the level of bilingualism? No, well, that's not my role. My role is not to participate in such an organization. That is the role of institutions that have signed agreements and who have contractual obligations. It would be difficult for me to play a monitoring role if I were myself involved within an assessment team. Thank you, Mr. Nadeau. Commissioner, if there are issues you would like to clarify and you would wish to send us the information, you can do so by providing it to the clerk. Mr. Chair, if members want more information on the Rigaud Centre, perhaps Ms. Charlebois could provide you with that. It was a general comment, but if members do wish to obtain more information, that's an opportunity that you have. And that could be an issue of interest to members. We now move on to a fourth round. I have two members. Let's go on a fourth round.
Albright, welcome to the committee, Mr. Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Mr. Fraser and your team for being here today. I certainly found the discussion very encouraging today, very informative, to see the initiatives that your team has taken to ensure that services provided in both official languages at the 2010 Olympics. And also, I was pleased to see that you commented favorably in relation to the $7.7 million investment on the part of our government after negotiations with VANOC. I want to just turn for a few minutes to the 11 recommendations that you made in your follow-up report and just ask a few questions regarding your involvement with the advisory committee, the Official Languages Advisory Committee, and ask what progress has been made so far in your dealings with the Official Languages Advisory Committee as it relates to the recommendations, the 11 recommendations that you made. And then also, do you know if the Grand Témoin of the Vancouver Games, Pascal Couchepin, will be closely involved in the Advisory Committee's work?
They are two separate roles. First of all, my knowledge of the workings of the advisory committee is only partial and indirect. I've had a few conversations, but for example, one of the things that the advisory committee has been considering is the question of the opening and closing ceremonies, which they are keeping an absolute secret. So I am, Mr. Chairman, assured that I will be pleased by the results, but as is totally their right, this is something that they are keeping to themselves, and they don't want anybody outside a very tight circle to know. The whole purpose is to have something that is going to be a surprise. So I have had conversations in the past with Judith Larocque, the Deputy Minister, who is a member of the Advisory Committee, with Jacques Gauthier, who is a member of the Advisory Committee. I wasn't able, because of a conflict in schedule, as I wasn't able to have a meeting with Mr. Raffarin yesterday, but I'm not a part of their discussion. So, and similarly with Monsieur Couchepin, when he, on his way to his first visit to Vancouver, he stopped off in Ottawa. I had a meeting with him. We had a very useful discussion. But he's not part of the advisory committee either. No, I mean, he reports to the International Organization of la Francophonie. And I made sure, as I did with Monsieur Raffarin, that he had our reports, that he was aware of what we were doing, and in the same way we made sure that Monsieur Raffarin had copies of our reports, and so he's aware of our activities. But we're all working. Well, although we're all working in the same direction, we're not. We're not part of any. We're all doing our work separately.
But dialogue is occurring between your different groups, and you mentioned the one example with Mr. Couchepin in your dialogue. So I think I would be concerned to find that there were 3 different silos, all doing their different work with no intercommunication in the interim.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, candidly, one of the things that I wanted to make sure in ensuring that our our reports were being shared, and that all of those organizations were aware of what we were doing, is I didn't want us to be played off against another. I didn't want a situation in which VANOC was saying, well, Mr. Couchepin doesn't have a problem with this. Why are you giving us a hard time? Or alternately say to Organisation Internationale de Francophonie, well, we met, that it would be important that we not be played off against one another and contradict each other, and that there be some communication between us, but without all. We are approaching it from different angles with different criteria and different, but all going in the same direction.
Right. And if I could have another minute. 30 seconds. We focused today on the games themselves and on the travel to the games. I'm wondering if you could also comment in terms of the ability for Francophone communities to participate in the Olympiads and also the torch relay. Will Francophone communities be represented well in those aspects as well?
The torch relay, I was struck by the explicit effort that the organizers of the relay made to ensure that this very complicated route included Francophone minority communities. In terms of the Cultural Olympiad and various other cultural events around, the Fondation Dialogue has been very involved in the cultural discussions around the Olympics, and I think they have had some positive news recently about support for La Place de Francophonie, where there will be a whole series of French language performances from on Granville Island during the games.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Albright, and the torch will be in Levy as well. The torch will be in my writing in Levy as well. Okay. Monsieur Rodriguez.
Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to spend too much time on Ms. Glover's comments, but I'd like to say that it's not because Mr. Damour asks questions on the specific case that involves the Commissioner that he does not show respect to the Commissioner. But it doesn't take much courage to attack someone who isn't here to defend himself. And you're on television, and your appearance was quite pathetic, and you have no regard for fellow politicians. And he doesn't work for you either, and you don't have to defend him when someone raises a negative issue. With regard to websites, you say you move from one jurisdiction to another. When you're on a federal website, it's obviously bilingual. But in other jurisdictions, for instance, on partner sites where the information might be only in English, well, it's a considerable challenge. Linguistic duality on the Internet is a considerable challenge. Following a question that was raised here and a complaint that we received with regard to BC or against BC tourism, although the complaint was deemed to be out of order because the Official Languages Act did not apply to provincial institutions, I nevertheless had a conversation with the Vice President of BC Tourism, and since that time, they've taken steps to ensure that information would be provided in French on their site. But basically what we're saying is that some partners play an important role in organizing the games that are in connection with the main sites but do not have any bilingual obligations. So like you said, I'm on the VANOC site and then I click on a link and then there's nothing in French. But you can't do anything because they're not subject to the Official Languages Act. Well, we can't pressure them to do anything. We can encourage them, and that's what we did. There's also partnership experiences between Parks Canada and British Columbian Parks, whereby they established a partnership when the park system in British Columbia received a French language request, that request could be forwarded to an employee at Parks Canada. Is there an amount that is set aside to ensure a smooth link between the various jurisdictions? Well, that'd be very useful, but does such a budget amount exist? Oh, Ms. Tremblay, I've been very attentive to this whole debate. In fact, I know of no amounts that are set aside for that. But of course, Canadian Heritage, under Part 7 of the Act, can take measures to encourage other levels of government, whether provincial or municipal, to provide services in both of our official languages. And I think it's through that authority that Canadian Heritage might have funding programs to support translation services. Thank you. What are the obligations of third parties or private sector enterprises, hotels, for instance, who receive people? I think the Canadian Olympic team is split 50-50 French-English, and a lot of families will be accompanying them. But what are the obligations with regard to restaurants, hotels, and especially within hotels, to broadcast, have TV networks in both official languages? Well, I recently spoke with someone in the broadcasting consortium, and they still having ongoing negotiations with hotels. Most hotels in Vancouver have ensured that there would be a French language coverage in their rooms. But work is ongoing. With regard to official language and bilingual obligations in the private sector, well, there are none. It's as simple as that. However, and I myself have had the experience to be served in French in a Vancouver hotel. In Whistler, we're often told that you hear the Quebec accent and the Australian accent. And I was quite surprised by the number of times I've heard people speak French in the streets of Vancouver. There are some tourist institutions in Vancouver. And let me say that particular efforts have been made with the support of the province and Industry Canada to increase French language tourism and to ensure that there would be proper French language services. And I can tell you that services have increased. So efforts are being made, but there are no actual obligations. We'll move on with Mr. Godin before concluding with Ms. Gay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to you, Commissioner, I have no excuses to make for comments I might make here in committee. I would like to remind you that you're an officer of Parliament. You work for us. You have received a mandate to ensure the respect of our official languages. You are the watchdog of the official languages. And if we have comments to make on reports you have submitted, I in no way need to apologize, and either to you or to Ms. Glover. And I will continue to assume my responsibilities as an MP, and if ever I overstep the bounds, I think you will call me and ask me to explain. But let me say that I will continue to assume my responsibilities, and if I'm not pleased to see anything in your report, it's in my interest, but not only in my interest, but it is my responsibility to make these comments public. With regard to your recommendations, Commissioner, Recommendation 10, the Commissioner recommends that the Canadian Foundation for Cross-Cultural Dialogue make a commitment to ensuring that negotiations and discussions are conducted to ensure proper bilingual services, and that cooperation is ensured to ensure safety, security at the Olympic Games in Vancouver. Well, that's all very nice. But how will services be provided to people on the streets in Vancouver? You say that a report has to be given by November 30th. And the Commissioner recommends that Air Canada and CATSA make reports by November 30th. Will you be appearing before the committee? And once you receive reports from these institutions, what will you be doing, and how will you ensure that those institutions follow up on your recommendations? I am ready to appear before the committee at any time, but I am not the master of your schedule. Perhaps I didn't make myself clear. Since you're calling for a report by November 30th, would you be ready to come back to us with information that you've received? Because you've made a number of recommendations here, and so you have to receive responses to these recommendations. Absolutely, Mr. Chair. At no time have I felt a lack of respect from committee members. I've never felt the need for members to apologize for any comments they might have made. I think it's the duty of an MP, if that MP has a complaint from someone, to ask questions. We can give explanations for our actions, and I'm quite willing and ready to give those explanations, whether here or in private. I'm quite eager, or I'm quite happy with the work that our staff has done. There is some misunderstanding with regard to how complaints are dealt with, but I think that it was quite appropriate for the MP to raise the issue. All of you here, Mr. Chair, all MPs receive complaints from their constituents, and so I find it quite appropriate to raise those complaints before the committee. And it is my role to deal with all MPs, not only in this committee, but throughout Parliament and of all parties. The Office of the Commissioner has an expertise, and its expertise has been provided to members from all parties with regard to explanations concerning the Act or explanations concerning specific bills. And that's my understanding of my mandate.
Thank you for your response. I think you're right. We have a responsibility as MPs, and you yourself has responsibility as a commissioner. So thank you. And we have those responsibilities regardless of our differences. Thank you. I think we'll wrap up now with Madame Gay. Thank you. I hope you haven't used up any of my time. I realize my colleague took quite a bit of time. I like him, but he did use some of that time. Mr. Fraser, I have a question on translation. If the House is not sitting, is there any way the services that we have here, translation services, can be used to assist the Olympic Games? Is that being done, or is it possible? Are you talking about translation or interpretation? I'm talking about written translation. Because there are many problems with written translation. We've seen them. Well, that was something I did raise during my discussions. And I don't know how the Translation Bureau will be proceeding. The translators for the House, I believe, work for Parliament and not for the Translation Bureau. Yes, but perhaps given the unique circumstances, they could help out with the Olympics. Because, you see, we get our translations very quickly. So I'm sure if they had to translate a CV, for example, I'm not talking about long, detailed documents, but perhaps they could do some supplementary hours, overtime, to help out with the games. Is that a possibility? Well, I'll take note of your comment. I can't really go into any details here. Well, Mr. Fraser, the House will have risen for a certain amount of time, and those people perhaps could be used. The House won't be sitting from mid-December till the end of January, so we could quite easily use the translation services that already exist. Well, we will pass that information on. Yeah, thank you, and I'd like you to come back with a response. Because I think that is an essential service. It already exists. It's less costly than creating another translation base. Now, my other question is this. Not everyone will be staying in Vancouver. Yes, the athletes will have their own housing, but I'm talking about the visitors. They'll be staying in neighboring cities. I mean, I'm not talking about Whistler. There are lots of Quebecers who go and work in Whistler. That's not a problem. I mean, I know people who have worked in Whistler, but I'm talking about other municipalities, neighboring municipalities that are Anglophone to a large degree. So what will happen with the tourism services there? Signage, for example, and services being offered in those municipalities. What will be done so the people who are staying there have access to those services in French? What stage are we at now with respect to those neighboring municipalities? Well, in terms of restaurants and hotels, as I pointed out, there is no obligation on their part. So that really is more an issue of how those commercial operations will decide to proceed. Now, in neighboring municipalities, I hope that the discussions at that level will, well, I hope that those discussions have now finished, not that they're starting. Well, that is a point that I will raise in my conversations with the organizers. But with respect to signage, that is obligatory, isn't it? Mr. Chairman, in terms of signage, those obligations bind federal institutions and Olympic installations. But as soon as you leave the Olympic site or federal sites, then that's more a negotiated zone. But it's certainly not one where there is any statutory obligation. So I see. So it's only really in Vancouver that there will truly be both languages as a result of negotiations and the process. But outside Vancouver, there is no obligation. No, there are no guarantees with respect to other municipalities. Thank you. I just wanted to know that because there will be people staying in neighboring areas. Vancouver will never be able to host all those travelers in the city itself. So these travelers will be staying in other municipalities. And it may be an issue if they don't have services in their own language. I realize it's not an obligation. Perhaps some pressure could be put on them to provide services in both languages. That is a point that I will raise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the member for her question. Mr. Fraser, if ever we call you back before the end of November, we will ask those questions, and we hope you'll be available to come and meet us because time is passing quite quickly. I am always available to appear before your committee, and as I have pointed out, all I do is wait for a request from the committee. It does take a certain amount of time, however, to be able to give you more information. I don't think coming back next week would serve much purpose. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gay. And Ms. Glover, did you have a point of order?
I didn't want to take away from the members' time, so I decided to wait till the end. But I just want to say very clearly on the rules, Mr. Chair, that when the member from the opposition with the Liberal Party addressed me directly, it was inappropriate, it was against the rules, it was unnecessary, and I feel that we must follow the rules, and the rules say I can cite public statements and they can defend them. I don't choose whether Mr. Damour is here or not, they do, but I felt that was totally inappropriate and should not have been done, and I would ask the Chair to remind members that they speak to the Chair and not to chastise one another directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Glover. I think you're right. We have to address our comments through the chair, so I would invite all members to do so. But just before, I want to thank our witness, the Commissioner. Thank you for being our watchdog, especially for the Olympics. We appreciate this work, and we'll seek to have a success as a result. On va suspendre 2 minutes parce que...
We'll now suspend for 2 minutes because there's some committee business that has to take place in camera. I have to consult with members on a few issues. We'll come back in a couple of minutes. Thank you.